He thought no one in the room would understand him. The billionaire's voice echoed in flawless Arabic, a test meant to expose ignorance, to remind everyone of their place. Laughter stirred among the wealthy guests, each face blank, each silence heavy. But then, unexpectedly, the quiet broke. From the shadows of service, a maid stepped forward, her dark skin catching the chandelier's glow. She spoke back word for word, her voice calm, commanding. In that moment, the room froze. How could the one they overlooked hold the power none of them dared to reveal? Her name was Amina, though few at the mansion ever cared to remember it. To them, she was simply the help, the one who carried trays, polished silver, and moved silently through the marble halls. She had been in the billionaire's service for only a year, yet already she had learned to make herself invisible. Guests rarely looked at her, and if they did, it was only to confirm she belonged in the background. But what no one knew was that before Amina wore the plain uniform of a maid, she was a daughter of scholars. Born in a small African village where education was sacred, she grew up listening to her father recite poetry in Arabic and her mother teaching verses of faith and history. Words had power, her parents said, and language was a doorway to dignity. When hardship struck and opportunities vanished, Amina left her home behind, carrying little more than those lessons. She cleaned homes, cooked meals, and bent to endless demands. Yet even in silence, she never abandoned the knowledge that once shaped her life. It stayed within her like a hidden flame, and on this night, under glittering chandeliers, among men in silk ties and women in diamonds, that flame was about to burn brighter than anyone could imagine. The billionaire's voice was meant to belittle, a performance for his elite audience. He never expected an answer. He never thought a maid could hold her ground. But Amina was about to remind them all that dignity cannot be silenced forever. The billionaire's mansion was alive with chatter that evening. Waiters weaved between tables, laughter spilled like wine, and every glance was a contest of status. The air reeked of wealth, of people who believed they belonged at the center of the world. Amina moved quietly through the room, balancing crystal glasses on a tray, unnoticed as usual. She had mastered the art of disappearing, yet she saw everything. She heard the whispered deals, the arrogant boasts, the way guests barely acknowledged those who served them. When the billionaire rose, the room hushed instantly. He was a man accustomed to command, his presence enough to silence even the most powerful among his peers. He smiled, the kind of smile that looked generous but carried edges sharp as glass. And then, without warning, he began to speak in Arabic. The guests blinked, confused. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Others forced polite chuckles, unsure what he was saying but unwilling to admit it. The billionaire continued, his tone heavy with condescension, his words a riddle meant for none of them to solve. It was not just a display of culture, it was a weapon, a performance designed to remind everyone that he knew more, he was above them. No one replied. Not a single guest dared to break the silence, and that was the point. The pause, the blank faces, the awkward shifting in seats, these were his trophies. He thrived on it, the spectacle of ignorance around him feeding his ego. He smirked, lifting his glass as though to drink in their discomfort. But then a voice rose, soft at first, steady, unwavering. Clear Arabic flowed through the air, each syllable precise, confident. Head snapped toward the sound, eyes widening. It was not a scholar, not a guest of honor, not one of the elite. It was Amina, the maid with her plain uniform and lowered eyes, except tonight. Her eyes did not lower. The room froze. Guests stared, their faces a mixture of disbelief and irritation. How could she, someone meant to stay invisible, break the silence meant for men in suits and women in jewels? Whispers rippled through the crowd like a storm. Some frowned, others gasped. But all turned toward her, the maid who dared to answer the question no one else could. And the billionaire? His smirk faltered. For the first time in years, he did not control the room. For a heartbeat, the chandelier's crystals seemed to stop shimmering. The clinking of silverware silenced midair. Every gaze locked on Amina, as if the mere sound of her voice had fractured the hierarchy the room depended on. Her words, fluent and unshaken, answered the billionaire's Arabic challenge with a grace that no one could deny. The billionaire's glass trembled slightly in his hand. He had intended the language as a wall, a show of superiority no one could cross. Yet here she was, the maid he never once looked in the eye, dismantling it with ease. His laughter faltered, his arrogance exposed in front of the very people he had sought to impress. A murmur rose among the guests, half disbelief, half unease. Some leaned forward, curious, others leaned back, as if recoiling from the disruption. But all of them understood one truth in that moment. The hierarchy had been broken. Amina's voice carried no boast, no anger. She simply spoke, steady and deliberate, as if she had always belonged there. Every word reminded them that intelligence is not bound by wealth, nor dignity erased by servitude. Her presence filled the space more powerfully than any diamond necklace or tailored suit could. And then the silence deepened. The billionaire attempted to smirk, to brush it off, but his eyes betrayed him. For the first time, he was small. The billionaire shifted in his place. His face tightened into a smile that no longer held authority. Around him, the room seemed heavier, as if every guest was silently measuring what they had just witnessed. Power, once his unquestioned possession, had slipped from his grasp and landed in the voice of the woman no one had ever thought to acknowledge. Amina lowered her eyes again, not out of shame, but because she had already said enough. She returned to her duties with quiet dignity, leaving the echo of her words hanging in the air. No applause followed. No recognition came, yet the silence she created spoke louder than any praise. It was the silence of people confronted with truth, uncomfortable, undeniable, unforgettable. Some tried to recover, filling the void with laughter, changing subjects, pretending the moment had not happened. But the unease lingered. Each guest had seen the arrogance of wealth, undone by the courage of someone they dismissed. And no matter how quickly they tried to forget, the memory clung like a shadow. The billionaire never repeated that performance again. He never dared to use his language as a weapon in that way. For he knew the risk. He could be silenced again, not by power, but by the very humanity he tried to crush. And for Amina, though the night passed without cheers or recognition, something had shifted. She had not just answered a man. She had answered centuries of dismissal. She reminded them, and us, that worth does not wear a uniform, and dignity does not bow to wealth.